Thank you. I'm delighted to be here on this particularly rainy day, but hopefully it's going to end up in sunshine with the result you all want. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my life in games, all 40 years of it, and how I believe games goes beyond entertainment and how it can really help with teaching of our children. So when we arrive in this world as babies, we interact with that world. Interactivity is a very powerful way of learning, and when we get older, we still enjoy solving puzzles, and when we attach rules to puzzles, they become games. I joined the games industry not long after chess was invented in 647. Started a company with two old school friends, the really handsome guy on the far side, that's me, and on this side, Steve Jackson and John Peake. And we want to turn our hobby of playing games into a business of making games. And we sent out a newsletter to everybody new in games, and one of the recipients was a gentleman called Gary Gygax, who lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and he just invented this game called Dungeons & Dragons. Anybody heard of Dungeons & Dragons in the room? That's very good to hear. So we started our company called Games Workshop, and we managed to put £50 together, and we ordered 6 copies of Dungeons & Dragons, and on the back of that huge order we got an exclusive distribution agreement for Europe. For 3 years, and so we started selling it mail order, and we went over to the States to see Gary, and in this photo we've got Fritz Lieber, a science fiction author, next to him Gary Gygax, the inventor, Professor Barker creates another role-playing game, myself holding the boxes looking a bit dodgy, Rob Kuntz, who was one of the D&D writers, and Steve Jackson at the front. The worrying thing about this particular slide is the 3 gentlemen to my right are all dead, and I'm kind of next in line, but let's not worry about that too much. Also got to meet Miss Wisconsin 1976. I don't know what she's doing today, but I'm here in London with you today, which is good. We tried to raise money. When we came back, go to the bank manager, say, got this great game, it's a role-playing game, you take on the roles of heroes and wizards, and you go on these fantastical journeys of the mind, interactive narrative, theatre on the fly, and we want to import more copies of this. And the bank manager looks at you rather like a dog watching television and ushered us out. So we had to make a choice because we'd been kicked out of our flat. So we had to find somewhere in a small office, and we were obliged to live in a van, not dissimilar to this one, for 3 months. But what I always say to young people is if you follow your heart, even though it seems bad at the time, it's much better to do that than to do a job that you don't enjoy just for money. So it's better to try and fail than not to try at all. We opened our first retail store back in 1978 in Hammersmith, trying to do a sort of Abbey Road reunion photo at some point. I met 2 people who were at the opening day so far. So if you're in that queue, just let me know. We'll try and do it. It might be a bit difficult to do that reunion shot because it's now a Bosnia and Herzegovina Community Advice Center. But I'm sure we can find a way. But I sold out of Workshop in 1991. Of course, it's now a publicly quoted company doing very well. Warhammer, 300 retail shops, White Dwarf magazine, etc. The next thing that Steve and I wanted to do, this was back in the early 80s, was to extend the power of that interactivity, how engaging that was with communicating with people, into a medium that had more mass appeal. And we came up with this interactive gamebook idea. I don't know if you're familiar with these back in the day, but these were books in which you, the reader, were the hero. It wasn't a traditional linear narrative. These were books which were broken into multiple paragraphs. At the end of each paragraph, you had to make a decision whether to turn left or right, simplistically, find a key in one room to be able to open the door further on down the paragraph, down the corridor. And they were a huge success, even though people were kind of a bit concerned that it wasn't a proper book. I remember going on Saturday Superstore and had number 1, 2, and 3 in the children's bestsellers list, and John Craven said, yes, but when are you going to write a proper book? But my point was that children were actually enjoying reading. So there were 17 million copies sold of the series, and they're in 32 languages. And we always, through our Games Workshop experience, able to convince foreign publishers to use the covers that we thought would be successful because of our Games Workshop, understanding what gamers want. But when we didn't, when the local territory convinced us that they knew better, sometimes we had to give way, which was the case in Japan. They thought that they knew their own market better. So this is the cover of Deathtrap Dungeon in most countries, and in Japan, this is the cover of Deathtrap Dungeon. So you have to make your own assumptions about that. But the important thing is that people were actually enjoying reading, which is surely a good thing, but no. The media at the time were very concerned. The Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide saying that if you're going to read these books, you're going to get interacting with ghouls and demons, you're absolutely going to get possessed by the devil. A worried housewife in deepest suburbia said, having read one of my books, her son levitated she said this on local radio. And so people were thinking, £1.50, we can fly, I'll have some of that. And Vicar threatened to chain himself to the railings of Penguin Books until they were banned. Of course, I'd like to thank them all for their amazing PR on our behalf, without which we'd have never been so successful. And when it comes to video games, of course, the media tends to go into an apoplectic frenzy, wondering what kind of doom and gloom is going to happen by children playing video games. I moved into video games in the 80s, designing first a game called Eureka, and I joined that company and became chairman of the new co, which we floated in 1995, called Eidos. And of course, Eidos was best known for Tomb Raider. And again, another thing what I say to young people when they're starting off is if you create some intellectual property, try to retain ownership of that. Too often there's a case as a creative nation that we trade away our IP for project finance, and we don't see full value of owning that content. Yes, if you do own that content, it can be amazingly profitable. So Lara Croft, Lara Cruz, when she was first created, started off as a simple sketch and became a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And to such a state in the 90s that all these companies, significant in themselves, were licensing Lara Croft to promote their own products, even though they're household brands themselves. And I'd just like to show you a couple of the ads that were put out at the time. Of course, this was good for us as well as these companies, because A, they were promoting Lara Croft as much as they were promoting their own products, and they were paying us for the privilege. So here's one of the ads from LucasAid, which used 3 campaigns and increased their revenues 11% in a very competitive drinks market. And in France, with Seat cars.
Sélection.
Cordoba Vario. Arosa. Ibiza.
Sauvegarder maintenant?
Non.
Sûr?
Oui. Alhambra. Montez, montez. J'ai peur toute seule. Seat, vous êtes loin d'avoir tout vu.
And when it came to Hollywood, she did go unnoticed. But I'm delighted to say we managed to get a executive producer role when we licensed the film rights to Paramount Pictures, and when they suggested that they would have Angelina Jolie play the role of Lara Croft. We said that's absolutely fine with us, no problem whatsoever. I did get to meet her a couple of times at the set of Pinewood. I'm still kind of recovering from that. It was a very tough job, but as I say, somebody had to do it. But the point I'd like to make is that games have now become pervasive in society. It's moved from a niche to a mainstream audience. Young children play games, young adults play games, old people like me still enjoy playing games. You can see everywhere people playing games on public transport, largely because of Apple with swipe technology. Similarly, as those non-gamers who are intimidated by a 16-button controller they swipe their finger across the screen and they're able to enjoy the delights of gaming. Yet it's a very competitive market, 1 million mobile game apps now trying to promote themselves through the world's smallest shop window, which is the App Store. We see now explosion of new genres in games, esports, for example. These are games that are played team against team, streamed live through Twitch TV, which has over 100 million subscribers. This is big business. It's a $100 billion a year industry, and it goes largely unnoticed. It's bigger than most entertainment industries, if not all of them. And it's also a great British success story. Grand Theft Auto 5, often pilloried in the UK press, generated $1 billion of revenue in 3 days. It's the largest entertainment franchise in any medium. And some of the best known blockbusters around the world have developed right here in the UK. But we've always lacked investment from back in the day when we had to sleep in the van. A lot of people who hold the purse strings don't understand the value of intellectual property. They don't understand intangible assets like we offer. We don't have bricks and mortar to act as collateral. So it's very difficult for content owners to actually raise finance. We need a skilled workforce, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in a few minutes. And of course, we need a digital infrastructure that can allow not just download of content, but upload minimum speeds. It's not games that make people violent, it's lag and latency, and the frustration of shouting at your television because it's your monitor because it's just failing in front of you. So it's very frustrating. So we're going to have more policy, I think, for all our sakes around digital infrastructure. There are 1,900 studios in the UK, which is great. But I like to argue the case for games being good for you rather than poisoning you. They're social. We're interacting with our friends, having a good time together. Games require you to problem solve. You cannot get through a game without solving a problem. It's impossible. You have to interact with that content. It's not just a passive engagement, it's interactive. Games give you instant feedback on how you're performing, and you're encouraged to try again. You're not punished for making mistakes. Games allow you to replicate and simulate real-world environments. A game like Roller Coaster Tycoon, where you take charge of building a theme park, all the rides, the staffing, setting the economy, and unless you do it well, the virtual customers will not arrive at your theme park. But then you can play with the parameters and make it successful. So that sort of learning by doing is very powerful, and it puts context into learning, which traditional teaching doesn't. A game like Civilization allows, again, context around history. You can be actually at the point of when these great events happened, rather than trying to memorize stuff and, of course, later on forgetting. Games like Portal teaches about physics. You can even understand ethics with games like Walking Dead. In games like Minecraft, effectively digital Lego, enabling children to build these wonderful 3D architectural worlds. Why wouldn't they want to become an architect after playing a game like Minecraft? Fashioning these fantastic worlds which they then share with their friends. You can use, in a serious context, games for pilots and surgeons, the armed forces, who obviously can make mistakes without any negative consequences. You can use games for rehabilitation for old people. And last but not least, games can be used to give children with severe disabilities a quality of life that they would not have had. And games allow them to engage with the world and they don't become frozen out. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, show you this video from Special Effects. I'm delighted to be one of their ambassadors to see what a difference games can make to these children's lives. chance to support Special Effect, please do, because they really do make a difference, because play is natural, and perhaps one day we'll get a headline like this. Perhaps not in my lifetime, but you never know. So we can play games, but how do you actually make them? We're a very creative nation. Look at our film, our fashion, our music, our theatre, our publishing, of course our games. And I think games exemplifies more than anything other medium how you bring together art and technology. Technology combined with the arts, this interactive experience with incredible technology, with wonderful art, is like none other. But like many industries, we've had a shortage of computer programmers, not just for the games industry. And if you think what's happened in an internet minute, 20 million WhatsApp messages, 2.78 million YouTube views, 150 million emails sent, there's a great opportunity to create applications, platforms, and it can't be done without people being able to code. And of course, the games is important. So I went to Ed Vasey, the culture minister, who's been a great supporter of the games industry and of course the creative industries, and told him of the plight of the industry, because there are simply not enough computer programmers of a high enough quality for our industry, let alone all the other IT industries around the country. So he tasked Alex Hope and I from Double Negative to write a review, which was backed by NESTA. And we looked at the whole pipeline of learning in primary, secondary, and higher education. And we were wondering, how can we turn our children from being simply consumers of technology into creators of technology? Because we're really at a crossroads. And like Douglas Rushkoff said, do we direct technology, or do we let ourselves be directed by it? Do we want to be in the driver's seat of technology or in the passenger's seat of technology? So we were wondering why fewer people were actually applying to study computer science at universities, and we realized the real problem was in schools, the way ICT was taught. Largely a strange hybrid of office skills, boring kids to death with Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, giving no insight whatsoever how to create their own technology. So our main recommendation was to put computer science in as a national curriculum, as an essential discipline, because this was nothing new. Back in the 80s, the BBC Micro was a cornerstone of computing in schools, and in the homes, a lot of people had a Sinclair Spectrum, the old Specky. People actually learned to program. And through those two devices, one of the outputs of that was the British games industry. So this was a good thing, but it's taken 30 years, but I'm delighted to say that our lobbying, our report, and forming a relationship with Google and other big hitters, we were able to convince Michael Gove to disapply the ICT curriculum and have the new computer curriculum that came into force last year. So how are we going to meet this challenge? It's on the curriculum. Who's going to teach the teachers? Because most of them, not most of them, but a lot of them are ill-equipped to actually deliver the new curriculum. Well, they can act as facilitators. Some of the children in the class will know a lot more about it than they can, and they could have facilitate a joint learning experience, looking beyond the four walls of the classroom to all these incredible free resources online, from using the Raspberry Pi to the recent initiative from Make It Digital, where they're giving a million microbits to every 11 and 12-year-old child in the country to be creators of technology. Let's have informal code clubs in schools where the children can jam and collaborate and have fun in learning to code. And we have to teach at a very young age, because we need to get more women in creating content as well as consuming it. So it's a great incentive, I think, to make technology and games and programming relevant at a very early age, to see the power of the creative potential of using code. So we have to have an education for the 21st century. As Richard Riley said back in a long time ago in the United States, that education should prepare jobs that do not exist, using technologies that have been invented to solve problems of which we are not aware. Some 65% of children in schools today will have jobs that do not yet exist. And yet, we seem to ignore that fact. And as Albert Einstein said, the only thing that interferes with his learning is his education. And today's children are very, very bored in class, and we wonder why they're fidgeting. It's because we are disconnected to the way they naturally behave. Back in the day, it was all very well to teach all the children the same skills, learning by rote, because it didn't matter, because they were going to be picked up and stuck in a factory doing the same jobs. But now we live in a very fragmented digital world. And those jobs are now being done by robots. And so it's really important that we teach children to think, because you cannot compete with the real thing. If your robots are coming, you better look out. So this is one of the reasons why I set up my own foundation. I'm going to be opening 2 free schools next year in collaboration with Aspirations Academies Trust to try and give children an authentic education for the 21st century, because they are different. Prolific use of social media, share everything, they connect your generation, and yet they're required to learn subjects in isolation in schools, which is kind of completely against how they naturally behave. So this authentic education has to be, I wouldn't say less academic, but I would like to see vocational skills taught as much alongside, and valuing practical skills as well as academic skills. So commentators are always seen as the very sort of high end of our society, yet the practitioners are kind of the low life. And so we've got to raise a profile of the people who do as well as the people who comment, and get away from this rote learning. We have a quadratic equation. We learn these at school. We forget then how to do it. Our iPhones can do this for us. We have to put context. When, why, and how do we use these equations? Hands up, anyone who can do this? 1, 2 people, 3 people. That's great, but for most of us, we forget. So do we really need to do that? No, let's get this context into them. Why do we want to start children off at a very early age with learning Shakespeare? I'm not saying they should use my books, but they enjoy the reading. And the important thing is to enjoy reading and then move on to Shakespeare when they want to, rather than when they're forced to. And we should stop punishing children for making mistakes. Failure is just success, work in progress. Allow them to fail, learn from their mistakes, and become confident in their ability to take chances. We don't want to strip away risk in their thinking. Being afraid of making mistakes is a real negative thing, and it has a really terrible impact on children's confidence, their ability to try and be different. So stop punishing them for making mistakes. I think the exam system contributes a lot to that sort of terrible thinking. We're so concerned about league tables and exam results. We're using children as guinea pigs to assess schools rather than wondering what they can actually learn themselves. And if there's only one, and I think this encaptures it all, for a first selection, everybody has to take the same exam, please climb that tree. This was a random question. So is an elephant a failure because he can't climb a tree? I don't think so. I think the elephant's pretty good at what he does, or she does. But together, we are all different, but together we can do great things. We shouldn't all be judged against the same metric, just because of sake of standardization. That is totally pointless. So I think computer science as a discipline helps overcome that. This is not just about coding, it's a way of thinking, how we can use problem solving in our lives, know-how as well as knowledge. We should be more playful in our learning, how children really enjoy primary school, and it's a huge culture shock when they get into secondary school, where there's lots of more examinations, a lot more rote learning, and with the anxiety that's now put into children, for me, it's frightening. It shouldn't be like that. There's no reason why learning can't be fun. And learning by doing is my biggest mantra. This child playing Minecraft, realizing that if he applies heat of the furnace to the sand, he'll create glass. It adds context, and that's the most important thing. You see by the actions that he will learn. Would your pilot flying you across the Atlantic, would you have liked that pilot to have learned how to fly by reading a book or by using simulation software? Learning by doing is powerful. So get children to make applications, build an app, build a website, make a game, and that's how they will learn. And one of the initiatives
The workshop that we're doing today is Unmaking Algorithms. It's a workshop that's broken down to 2 parts. The first part is a computing unplugged workshop, where students will learn about algorithms, using algorithms in our daily lives and B-bots. And then the second workshop is one that's a practical workshop using the DIY gamer kits. The overall aim is for students to actually understand what an algorithm is and how to break down a problem and solve it using step-by-step instructions. First of all, they'll learn about what daily algorithms are, such as brushing their teeth or playing a DVD or something like that. We're encouraging them to think about what they do on their daily routine and how it's not just automatic. They're actually breaking a problem down and actually doing it step by step without realising. So something like brushing their teeth, that there is a moment of realisation when they see how such a simple, what they thought was a simple task, is actually quite a complex routine. They then use that knowledge to then go on to write their own algorithms for a scenario. So they're identifying different steps, and then from that they go on to work with B-bots. B-bot is like a tiny robot in the shape of a bumblebee, and it has keys on its back which you can press to program it to move. We provide the students with a scenario. The scenario will tell them what the B-bot has to achieve. It gives them the problem, and they have to write down the steps and the instructions, and then they go ahead and program the B-bot and see whether or not they've correctly instructed the B-bot to do what it's supposed to do. They're an educational tool used mainly by primary schools, but we use them with our girls in year 7, 8, 9, and it's a really fun way to learn how algorithms work.
And we should also allow children to collaborate, because that's actually how we work in the workplace. Peer-to-peer learning is very powerful, learning at their own speed, in their own language, and we should encourage that. It's not cheating. And we should let children, use their imaginations. So again, so powerful. Of course, STEM subjects are important, science, technology, engineering and maths, but we should never ever underestimate the value and the contribution that the arts make, from music, drama, music, and the art itself, in promoting diverse thinking, self-expression and self-determination, the very raw materials of the creative industries. And we should embrace the STEAM age, not just the age of STEM. Bringing art and science together creates that magic wonder. Some of the best scientists are also fantastic musicians. Leonardo da Vinci, the world's greatest ever painter, was also a mathematician and engineer. It's joining the right side to the left side of the brain. Art and science should no longer be a question of either or. So, in summary, I think it's really important for any child, no matter how disadvantaged, to be given digital making skills, encourage them to be diverse thinkers, motivated, encourage curiosity. And they might not become the next Mark Zuckerberg, they might find a way along that path of their lives to become a job maker rather than just a job seeker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Are you happy to take questions?
Yes, of course.
Any questions?
At what age is the new curriculum for computer science going into schools? Is it secondary school or primary school?
Primary. It's important to get to. It's like a language. It's important that we get to a very early age. And it doesn't have to be just about coding, as the digital schoolhouse shows. It can be done unplugged. It's to get to think computational thinking, algorithmic thinking, get them to understand problems, how you instruct a device to do something. To think in those terms is going to help them a huge amount when they go down the road, because learning by rote is kind of. I'm not saying you should outsource your thinking to Google, but I think you should move. You should also have know-how as well as knowledge, and that learning by doing, getting children engaged, is a very, very powerful way of learning. There was a study done after my books were done back in the 80s. They reckon there was a 70% increase in literacy because the children were engaged in making the decisions. So that interactivity was a lot more powerful. There was a study also, the program in Horizon last year. Don't know if you saw it. They took some old people who'd never played a game before, and they did an MRI scan of their cognitive activity, gave them a tablet to play games on for a month, put them back for the scan, and their cognitive activity had been raised considerably because of that interactive thinking and problem solving. And the conclusion was, might be better to give old people a tablet to play on rather than a tablet to swallow.
Okay. Ian, you said something about IT skills and the gap there. Seems a long way to go from primary school to actually filling that gap.
Well, there's going to be lots of mistakes, but England now is the first country in the world to have compulsory computing on the curriculum, and there's going to be lots of mistakes, but we can't afford not to do it. Can't afford not to do this. It's really important because the world is being transformed by technology, exponential use of technology, and we won't be recognised. We have no idea where we're even going to be in 10 years. So unless children become digital citizens, understand how code works, they're not all going to become programmers, but at the same time, the curriculum, not everyone's going to become a chemist or a biologist, but they have to understand how code works. So I think it's really important at a very early age and learn it like a language, whether or not they use it. They have to understand the context of this code because that is the language. I would say computer literacy is almost as important as literacy and numeracy of the analog age.
So it's a way of thinking, really, isn't it?
It is. I would say computer science is the new Latin because it underpins the digital world in the way Latin underpins the analog world.
Do you think that same education would be relevant inside businesses? So I mean, we're all technologists and we understand it to a degree, but I guess the broader population inside our organisations probably don't to the same extent. Do you think that same level of education?
I think everyone benefits from problem solving, absolutely. If you have someone who can problem solve and is a very good communicator, these are meta skills that you can apply to any tasks. But, and the more mobile and crazy the world becomes, the more you need these meta skills to be able to adapt to a changing world. So you've got to be agile and mobile to succeed in the future because it's changing before our very eyes.
So what's more important? Is it the game playing or is it the coding?
For me, it's games. I'm an uber geek. I've got 1,000 board games at home. I'll just get that out there right now. So I enjoy the social element of games. I enjoy the figuring things out, the strategy, the multiple thought processes when you're doing it. But obviously, you need the code to enable that game to be published, to be developed. You can't. So it's bringing, I say, the designers, the artists, and the programmers together to create this very compelling, interactive entertainment proposition.
Yeah.
What's your favourite board game?
That's a bit like saying, what's my favourite child? And I've got 4 of those. So it depends on how many people you're playing, how long you want to play for. I can tell you what we're playing at the moment, which we enjoy, is a game called Splendor. It's a card game. Another one's called Ticket to Ride, which is not surprisingly, a railway game. But you can't have favourites.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Ian. I'd like you all to join me in thanking him for a very inspirational talk and for the future of our children, really.
Thank you very much.